Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the July 29, 2021 meeting of the Edina Housing and Redevelopment Authority. Before we call the meeting to order, I want to let everybody know that we are meeting both in person and electronically. This is our new hybrid model that we started with our first City Council in July meeting. All available members of the HRA, some staff and presenters are participating from council chambers for the first time since 2020. Others are participating from their homes or offices. Before we begin, as I mentioned earlier, there's a few things to cover. Today, community comment will be the only opportunity during the meeting for members of the public to participate. You were allowed to speak up for up to 3 minutes about anything that's not on today's agenda or scheduled for a future public hearing. So if you want to participate in community comment, the 800 number you want to be calling is 800-374-0221, and the conference ID number is 3062846. 3062846. Individuals in the waiting room, electronic waiting room, will be invited to come forward to speak first, then we'll hear from those who have called in. So just to make that clear, individuals that are in the council chambers will be invited to come forward to speak first, then we'll hear from those who have called in using the new hybrid system. You'll be given 3 minutes to speak. For those in the room, the red light at your podium will turn on when you are out of time. The Administrative Support Specialist, Liz Olson, will let anyone who calls in know if they go over the 3-minute mark, and then we'll ask you to wrap up your comments. And we also ask that individuals not repeat information already presented. Of course, if we can avoid redundancy, that's always a good thing. Call in if you have new comments or information to bring forward. So thanks in advance for your patience as we work to conduct this meeting in this new hybrid format. We hope there will not be any issues, but be assured that we will do our best to continue the meeting as best we can if there are any communication difficulties. All right, so that, having provided that information, I'm going to call the meeting to order, and I'm going to ask Liz Olson to provide us with a roll call.
Commissioner Anderson.
Here.
Commissioner Jackson.
Here.
Chair Hovland.
Here. Next is the Pledge of Allegiance, folks. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We have a form of meeting agenda in front of us this morning. Is there anyone who wishes to modify the meeting agenda from a staff or a HRA standpoint? Is there a motion to approve the meeting agenda as published?
So moved.
Second.
Got a motion and a second to approve the meeting agenda as published. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. Now it is time for community comment. We'll now hear from any residents who would like to speak to us about something that's not on today's agenda or scheduled for a future public hearing. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to address the HRA on a matter of concern to them? For those that might be calling in for community comment, again, the number is 800-374-0221, and the conference ID number is 3062846. 3062846. An operator will ask for your name and street address to get in the queue to speak. Press *1. You'll be given 3 minutes to speak, and Director Benarott will bring you into the room so that the HRA can meet with you this morning. All right. Anybody on the line? Director Benarott.
I do not have anyone on the line. As you know, there is a brief delay with the broadcast, so I would recommend we wait a minute or so before moving on to give those a chance to get in the queue if they so desire. My clock shows it at 7:36. I'll come back to you at 7:37 or when I have a caller, whichever is first.
Right,
actually, I'll come back to you at 7:38 because it just switched for me.
Thank you.
It is now 7:38, and I have no callers, so I think it's safe for you to move on with your agenda.
Very good, thank you. The next matter on the agenda is the consent agenda. There's a couple of items on the consent agenda this morning. Is there anyone on the HRA that wishes to remove an item from the consent agenda? Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda as published.
I'll move the consent agenda.
Thank you. Second. Commissioner Anderson, thank you. All right, any further discussion? All those in favor of adopting the consent agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. And then on to reports and recommendations. We've got some real interesting work to do this morning. And the first matter in front of us is item A, item 7A, and that is a proposed resolution 2021-06, which would establish the 4040 West 70th Street Tax Increment Financing District and modify the tax increment financing plan for the Southdale 2 TIF district. And Director Hawkinson, Manager Hawkinson, has this matter for us this morning. Welcome.
Thank you. It's going to take a moment for me to get used to being back in person and wearing normal shoes. Thank you. I'm now to practice. Okay. As you noted, we do have a full agenda today, so I will be somewhat brief. One thing of note is today's action to support the creation of a housing TIF district. The amount of the PAYGO TIF loan will be discussed at a future date. So we are not discussing the gap financing or the financing needed for this development at this time, purely about the creation of the district. So one thing that I failed to mention at our June meeting was the community support for affordable housing. And that element, I went through the requirement of public participation in affordable housing, but I didn't talk about the emotional aspects or the desire of the community to create this type of housing. So I wanted to make sure that I cover that a little bit today. The TIF is a financing tool, amongst other tools, that is used to support the creation of affordable housing. The need and community desire for more affordable housing has been repeatedly supported in multiple city documents and outreach efforts, including the community surveys, the comprehensive plan, the housing task force outcomes, and the community vision. To use TIF, a housing district must be created. We are at that step. A plan is adopted with a maximum budget, the details of which will be discussed at a future date. As Southdale 2 special legislation pooled funds will be used in this development, and as there's a sunset date by which we must commit them, there's a time sensitivity to creation of this district. With Housing TIF, we can create the district now and dive into the financing details at a later date before we commit the funds. You've seen this graph. It's been shared by Nick, it's been shared by Bill and me in the past. The TIF being requested in the new increment being generated by this development. To have a TIF district approved, Ellers has reached out to the county and school district to let them know about the public hearing on August 4th at City Council. These other taxing jurisdictions have the opportunity to weigh in on the city plans. So where is this TIF district? We are proposed, first of all, we have used TIF for more than 30 years. Past projects include 50th and France, Edinburgh Park, Centennial Lakes, Grandview, and Southdale. TIF was also used at 44th and France, Wooddale and Valley View, and 70th and Cahill, but were terminated early. Currently, about 5% of the city's tax capacity is captured in TIF. This is with the inclusion of the Southdale 2 district. Relatively speaking, in Edina, TIF is used less than most of our immediate neighbors. However, once the Southdale 2 district expires at the end of the year, only about 1% of the city's tax capacity will be captured in TIF. The inclusion of 4040 West 70th Street will not have much effect on increasing this percentage. So the proposed TIF plan before you today. It's one parcel. That's the immediate parcel of 4040 West 70th. This is for the creation of 118 units of affordable housing. It will be affordable housing district. It's a 21-year term. It will allow pooling, in addition to capturing new increment, it will also allow for the pooling, to use the pooling from the Southdale 2 Special Legislation District. The estimated annual tax increment is a little over $200,000, and it creates approximately $3.2 million in increment over 21 years. And that increment, with the time value of money, would leverage about $1.8 million in upfront construction proceeds, since the 3.2 is over the 21 years. So why it's needed for this project, and again, we'll get into the details of the financing at a later date, is that it would leverage about $1.8 million in additional debt financing, which is about 6% of the overall budget. So the next steps is, once we'll have the public hearing, this is one of the requirements, is have the HRA approve the creation of this TIF district. Then we'll have the public hearing next Wednesday night at City Council, and that again will be a public hearing. And then once the TIF district is created, we can certify that, but I will be coming back once all the other financing for this development is lined up. They are applying to the Met Council, they are applying to Minnesota Housing, they're applying to VII.B. So once all the financing is lined up and we know what the whole package is, I will be coming back to you with a redevelopment agreement. And that's it. So I hope staff recommends support of the resolution.
Thank you, Manager Hawkinson. Are there questions for Manager Hawkinson on this matter? I notice we have our Public Finance Advisor with us this morning too, Nick Anhut from Ellers, so I think he's available for questions on this. Could you talk a little bit about the interrelationship between the Southdale 2 TIF pooled funds for the acquisition of the site and what we'd be doing here in providing a potential funding source if the district is established for the development of these 118 units? Does that make sense?
Yes. Chair, Commissioners. So last year, we did approve the modification of the Southdale TIF plan to allow for regular TIF pooled funds to be used for the acquisition of this parcel. And that was a holding spot, and we weren't able to use the special legislation TIF pooled funds at that time because we didn't have a fully defined project. We knew that we wanted affordable housing, we knew that we wanted it age restricted, but we didn't know how many units. We didn't have a site plan in front of us, so we used regular pooling that doesn't have the sunset date to buy the land, with the intention, and I was pretty clear at the meeting 2 years ago or a year and a half ago, saying that our hope was that once we had a plan, once it started the site plan approval process, we would swap out the regular pooled funds that did not have a sunset date with the special legislation funds that have a sunset date to draw those funds down, because we lose them at the end of the year if we don't commit them. So those funds were granted or loaned to the Edina Housing Foundation for the acquisition of the property. They're going to maintain ownership of the land and contribute it to the development through a ground lease to keep it affordable for 99 years. In addition to that, there's still gap on the project. Construction costs have increased. They are, since they're reduced rents, they can't leverage the amount of debt needed to fund the project construction. So there's additional gap. And so the TIF, the new TIF, the increment, will be used to help leverage additional debt. So it helps fill the gap that will be created for this development. So both will be in the project.
Both would be in the project.
Both would be in the project.
The so-called loaned money doesn't come back
The Chair
to the
Commissioner,
HRA.
the land money, the agreement with the foundation was, if this project moves forward and it's affordable and we enter into a ground lease, that loan will be forgiven to the foundation because they will maintain ownership of the land. If the project does not move forward, if we do not create affordable housing at that site, the foundation may be obligated to pay back the money through sale of the land or some other mechanism, pay back that land, the loan that was used to acquire that land. So that 3.6, all things going well, will not come back.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner?
you may ask this question, but at what point did we swap out with the special legislation funds?
We haven't yet. We need the approval of the creation of this new TIF district in order to swap out those funds. So if all goes well, next Wednesday night, and then the decision at the following council meeting, then sometime soon thereafter, we'll be able to swap out those funds.
Okay, thank you.
So our total investment projected would be the land value at $3.6 million that we loaned to the Housing Foundation. That would become a gift to them, essentially. That would be one element of the investment. And the second portion, what you're talking about today, which has yet to be analyzed because we don't know exactly what those costs are going to be. But until we set up a TIF district and define its boundaries, we can't do any of this work. And that's the purpose of your meeting today.
Correct.
With us.
That is
Okay.
the purpose.
All right. Other questions from commissioners? Commissioner Anderson?
Thank you. I'm just wondering, just in terms of protocol this morning, I know that we're going to consider a staff report on West Promenade, and is that to be considered in sum total, or are we going to vote on this resolution and then move to the discussion on the West Promenade?
I think, well, do we have a preference on that?
Chair Commissioners, we do have Chad, Chair? Or Director Milner here to discuss the West Promenade. That is not part and parcel to this action today for the creation of the TIF district. They are separate items.
Right.
But he is here and prepared to talk about the plans for the West Promenade. I believe at that city council meeting when that was discussed,
Yes.
we divided the two. The improvements of the West Promenade separate from the housing project.
Okay.
Because it's unlikely that we'd be able to use the TIF from this.
Which we
to
have
fund the
discovered
project.
in this interim.
Yep.
Correct.
Okay.
And that'll be the last item on the agenda this morning.
Yes.
Talk about those potential transportation improvements. So, having heard that recommendation from staff, is there a motion to adopt Resolution 2021-06, which is the establishment of the 4040 West 70th Street Tax Increment Financing District and approving a tax increment financing plan, therefore?
So moved.
I'll second.
Got a motion and second to adopt Resolution 2021-06 as defined. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. All right, very good. Thank you, Manager Hawkinson.
Thank you. See you Wednesday.
We'll get back in the groove of being face-to-face here. For all of us, it's not a new adventure, but a reacquainting. Good morning, Mr. Neuendorf. Manager Neuendorf is in front of us this morning with some other interesting things to talk about. So this is the Southeast Edina Redevelopment Project area.
Yes, good morning. Thank you. I have a few items here this morning. These first two are fairly simple and direct. The one we're speaking of right now is Resolution 2021-07, and this is in regards to the Southdale 2 TIF district. With recent changes in state law in the final budget package that was passed, it looks like it could be appropriate to reconsider some of the budgeting in the Southdale 2 TIF district. Over the years, I think we've modified this district's budget on 2 or 3 occasions, and after speaking with our financial advisors at Ellers, they recommend that we schedule a public hearing in September to actually give that consideration on whether or not it's appropriate to do that again. So the step this morning is simply to make a recommendation from the HRA to our City Council to schedule and convene a public hearing to consider changes to that TIF district budget. There will be an accompanying resolution on next week's City Council meeting to actually set that date. So the step this morning is simply a procedural step, but it is required in order to have our financials advisor actually look at the budget, put a new plan together, share that with our colleagues at the county and the school, and actually give it full consideration. So staff recommends that we do approve this resolution this morning. Happy to answer any questions, and as the chairs mentioned, Nick Anhut from Elders is with us this morning if there are any detailed questions.
All right. Questions for Manager Neuendorf?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Commissioner?
Thank you. Mr. Neuendorf, could you please tell us what triggered the review of this?
I don't know if I could. Every year with the state budget, there's changes in laws. Staff reviews them. We work with the League of Minnesota Cities to review them. Our financials advisors are out there looking out for us to see what's new and different. So somewhere in between different people looking at it, we noticed that there were changes in the tax increment laws this year that might warrant consideration.
Okay, thank you. So it's nothing in Edina proper. It has to do with changes, adjustments to the law.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
And what this resolution would do in part is to call for a public hearing on September 9th.
That's correct.
All right. And then for folks that might be listening in, do you want to define what the Southeast Edina Redevelopment Project area is?
Sure. The Southeast Edina Redevelopment Project area is essentially 2/3 of Edina, basically from Highway 100 east. And it was a boundary that was established dating back to the 80s. It was modified over the years, over the decades. But right now it includes most of the commercial areas in Edina. That's really the focus. So the boundaries meander from Southdale and that whole greater Southdale Centennial Lakes area, picks up Pentagon Park, picks up a little bit of the Cahill area, picks up Grandview, picks up 50th and 44th in France. So it's an area that we've established and identified as an area where redevelopment tends to happen. Since everything is already built out, there's no new development, it's all redevelopment. And this plan just basically enables TIF financing to be considered within those areas.
Good. Thank you. So we have Resolution 2021-07 in front of us this morning. Is there a motion to request the adoption of Resolution 2021-07, which would request the City Council on September 9th, 2021, to call for a public hearing on the proposed modifications to the redevelopment plan for the Southeast Edina Redevelopment Project area and Southdale 2 tax increment financing plan?
So moved.
Second.
Got a motion and second on adoption of Resolution 2021-07 as described. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. All right. Manager Neuendorf, on to 5146 Eden Avenue.
Yes, yes.
Kind of an update there on your redevelopment planning.
Correct, yes, and it's nice to talk to you in person about this project. We've been talking virtually for a year and a half, and it's so nice to actually see everyone face to face. So this next item is a recommendation to continue in our conversations with the Franchou Company and with United Properties, and that's to focus and arrive at a plan that we're all excited about for the vacant land at 5146 Eden. So the step here is really based on the conversations we've had back in May and June of this year with the HRA regarding what type of activities the HRA would like to see on that property. Activities that would create or would address and achieve some of the goals that were identified in that 2012 Grandview framework. So we've been continuing our conversations with Franchou and United Properties. United Properties' role is working on a senior cooperative housing on a portion of the site, likely on the southern portion of the site. And when we last convened in June, we discussed having some kind of public activity generator on the north portion, a restaurant, some kind of dining opportunity, maybe an entertainment opportunity, but we didn't know exactly what we wanted there. So this proposal would engage Franchou essentially to act as our broker to see who's out there in the marketplace that's interested in this site, what their transactional needs would be. For example, some restaurants operate best if they rent the space. Others operate best or function best if they own the space. But right now, we don't have any hard options to look at. So what we'd like to do is engage Franchu and have them scour the market and see who's out there, see who makes sense, and then bring that information to us later this fall in September so that the HRA can make a well-informed decision. The goal here is to find that public type activity that, you know, that creates the destination, that creates the space. So it's something that Franchu is well versed in. They've got lots of ties in the marketplace. So the engagement letter is attached to the contract, or is attached to the packet. Dave Anderson from Franchu is here with us this morning, and Alex Hall from United Properties is online on the WebEx if there's any questions. But staff has helped prepare this engagement letter. We certainly recommend that we move forward with it and put that in your hands this morning.
All right. Thank you, Manager Neuendorf. Are there questions for Manager Neuendorf on this matter? Commissioner Jackson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So reading through this, the first question that really popped into mind is we've got this drawing of how the site would be parceled out. And this might be for Mr. Anderson or for you, but when we're going out marketing, how much do we need to have defined what's going to be where? So which percentage is going to be for the senior housing and which for the activity space, and then any sort of agreement with using that parking area to the north of the senior housing spot?
Great question. I'll have Dave get into a little bit more detail on that. But yes, in the packet there is a very rough sketch. You'll notice it's not dimensioned, so all those lines are a little bit fuzzy at this point. So there's no specifics that are given. We're really trying to collect information and see what the need is. But Dave, I wonder if you might be able to put a little bit more detail to that.
Thank you, Manager Neuendorf. Welcome, Mr. Anderson.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. Commissioner Jackson, your question. And
would you identify yourself too, please?
Dave Anderson with Franchu, 7101 West 78th Street.
Thank you.
And Bill touched on the layout of the site that you've seen in the sketch. Really allows enough area to design the senior co-ops of 90 units, approximately, perhaps could be a few more units. So really the site planning works with that sizing, and then we'll set that dimension for the north portion of the site. So I think with approximation, we will learn from talking to operators what kind of dimension for layout for that concept that we've started with would be necessary. So that will be due diligence.
Okay, so you've got the tools from us you need to go forward. When you're talking to potential people to develop that or to operate it, you don't need details from us on the exact size of that piece of land.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner, no, I think we have enough information.
Okay, good. Thank you. And just generally, I want to thank you both for the time and effort that's gone into this. This is just, I feel like we're pulling something beautiful out of a rat's nest. So it's really been complicated, and it's exciting to see something concrete coming forward.
Thank you, Commissioner Jackson. Commissioner Anderson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure who to direct questions to, but I'll just start throwing them out. So the terms of the engagement letter place the financial responsibility for assembling a talent pool on the HRA. And I guess the question is, I'm getting here this morning that Franchu would actually be directing that, if that's accurate, or if not, the next question would be, do we have a pool of such providers that we might be calling on that might play the role of a consultant here?
Yeah, I'll address that one, Commissioner. At this point, through this whole multi-year process, Franchu has worn many hats. At this stage in the process, they're really acting as our broker. to go out in the marketplace and see who's out there, who's interested. They're better suited than our city staff is to have those connections and get those conversations. So at this point, it's their time and their energy that's at risk. We're hoping that we get to a happy conclusion, but there are still several unanswered questions that the HRA will have to give consideration to later this year. Are we interested in leasing the land? Are we interested in selling it? Are we interested in land lease? Lots of options. We haven't made any of those decisions yet. The HRA board will need to make those decisions eventually. But at this point, if we don't reach agreement on a user and on a transaction, that would be essentially Franchu's time at risk in that regard. One of the investments the HRA will be making is to hire a parking consultant to look at that existing parking structure behind Jerry's, just to confirm how many stalls might be available for this vacant site without compromising the function over at Jerry's in the office building, in the grocery, Walgreens, et cetera. So we will have a little bit of consultant time that the HRA will incur over the next month or two. But until we actually get to a transaction, there's no HRA funds at risk.
I see. Well, I was really actually referencing the disposition of the site. And so I just want to have clarity on what step one entails.
Let me look at step one again. Yeah, so step one is written in the proposal letter. Would be, there is another piece I forgot, and thank you for bringing this up. So there's been conversation about how the northern half works. So the concept plan shows some kind of dining facility or dining function with indoor and outdoor space, and then it shows a public green space to the north. There's lots of questions about, Member Jackson brought them up. How big are those? What do they look like? What's the function? All that's pretty fuzzy right now, but the HRA will also, our intention is to engage with a local landscape design firm, Confluence. They've done work for the city before. They've done work on this site in past iterations. They're very familiar with the site. So we also will be engaging them to do some exploration about what that green space looks like and what that interplay is between the new pedestrian bridge and the new sidewalk that's being built, along with this green space, and how that could relate to a future, I keep saying restaurant, but some kind of outdoor activity generator. So that will be another cost that we do incur. I apologize, I had forgotten about that one.
So then what would happen here, if I understand it correctly, what would happen here, landscape architect and then the parking consultant would actually be the responsibility of HRA, but it's not totally clear because it talks about engaging design, operational, and third-party market consultants. And I want to be certain that we're not really seeking advocacy from a third party, but I do think is that clarity in terms of the vision that I feel that the HRA has brought forward in terms of a community gathering space and a community benefit, that's fully realized. We're only going to do this one time. And so I want to be certain that that's the case. In general, the engagement, the terms of the engagement letter seem brisk to me, that we're moving quickly, and from this point where we just don't have much information, we don't know what's going to happen there. We're waiting for someone to come forward. It seems to me that within 30 days, we're going to have very limited meeting time to review and consider. And so the triggering dates in here become a concern for me. I'm beginning to feel that we're being managed by the developer as opposed to having our goal of achieving a significant public realm benefit here in alignment with the, I think, much-needed senior cooperative, the age-restricted ownership option that could go forward there. And I don't see one as more important than the other. It would be natural, given the business model, that the developer might see otherwise. And so I just want to be certain that the interest of the public, and especially the HRA, as the vision has come forward, are recognized and realized, as opposed to moving quickly through, jumping at this, saying, and the language here in step 2, it's pretty clear that there's kind of a management or overview on the part of the developer and involvement here, and the stated reason is that that the site works best for the cooperative. And again, to me, they're of equal importance. And the quick sketch that Member Jackson was referencing, Commissioner Jackson, excuse me, that Commissioner Jackson was referencing is just the site allocation itself, which has been brought forward in the past in terms of making certain that we have space available to really create the kind of benefit that we seek. And then what we do from the 30-day period, which is brisk, what we do from the 30-day period is we enter into a 60-day period, at which time then we are committing by virtue of the engagement letter to that project by this developer on that site, which I don't have a great objection to. It's not so, I wouldn't want to be misunderstood. I just want to be certain that we have a high level of satisfaction with what we actually engage on and take part in. And so that the language seems to me to be, I guess I wouldn't call it restrictive, but it's very detailed and could be conceived as not necessarily in the interest of the quality of the Northside project. So I just don't want to feel in the end that this is a developer project as opposed to our city project. And so I don't really have any more questions as such, but wanted to mention those things.
That's very helpful. And if I could add something to that in response, another place to look to better understand the schedule is the last page of the letter. Mm-hmm. So at this point, we're aiming at late October for this group to make a decision. So the intention of this 30-day to kind of get the ball rolling is to start putting some clarity on things. Right now, there's lots of questions, and for example, with the interest of the co-op building, the co-op developer has made it clear that they're very excited if there's some kind of green space or an amenity just adjacent to their future project. But if for example, the HRA decides to build a honky-tonk restaurant that's open till 3 o'clock in the morning every night, their enthusiasm for the site drops considerably. So we all need to explore what activity means, what public space means, what dining means, and we want to get started on that. I think there's a lot of enthusiasm about having a co-op in the area, but we need to start pinning down details. We want to start that exploration immediately, quite frankly, so that once we get to October, we can bring the full HRA board good options, and then make a choice and see if one of those is the right choice. We might hate to say this, but we might get to October and say there's 8 choices and we don't like any of them. That's certainly our right. We're, on behalf of myself and Franchu and United Properties, we want to get some options in front of you that you're excited about, and then pull the trigger on one of them and start rolling. So I don't feel that we're being rushed, but certainly we want to get started sooner than later.
I think that the honky-tonk concept is an unlikely prospect. However, I'm certain that the HRA, including our unavailable members today, have a great deal of interest and a lot of excitement about what can happen there. I just want to be certain that we're not approaching this on the basis of how do we run 2 businesses here, as opposed to how do we create a benefit that really gives our residents a sense of pride and a sense of involvement, and where we are achieving what we are talking about achieving. And I want to be clear that the restrictions in the engagement letter may not provide the appropriate time to do that. Maybe it will. If we've got great folks working directly towards it, that's quite possible. The timelines laid out in here are very amenable to the construction schedule that I see noted, but I don't know that that is our primary concern. We just, I think it's important that the construction schedule be met if possible, and we should work towards that directly. But I want to also know that we're really going to have a dynamic project there. That's all.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Jackson?
Thank you. I have a follow-on to that, and this might be for you or Mr. Anderson, and that is, given the state of the hospitality industry after the pandemic, is that going to be a factor in our ability to find vendors and see their interest in investing? And sort of that goes to the timing. If in 30 days it might be a battered industry, in 90 days it might be a growing industry, and do we have any sense of that?
There's certainly a lot of unpredictability these days and over the last year, but projects are happening. We've already had conversations with a Twin Cities-based business that does restaurants and event space. They're highly interested in the site. We still have to find a project that works and the site plan that works and all those things. New restaurants are opening in Edina. 50th in France has seen several, even one during the pandemic that opened and closed and opened and closed and then finally reopened for good. So there are projects happening, but there definitely is uncertainty in the marketplace, uncertainty in the financing world. But we're finding that experienced operators that have projects that make financial sense are getting funded and are getting open.
Very good, thank you. And if I may, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I have one other question. This is, I only asking this for timing, so I don't want to get into another rabbit hole. But looking at this drawing, it does say 10% affordable housing with the co-op. And when are we going to, I know there was some discussion, and since Manager Hawkinson's here, some discussion about whether units for sale would be subject to our affordable housing policy, and where are we at on that? And when will we make a decision?
Yes, the units, 10% of the units in the building will be priced to be affordable. We're still determining what exactly that means in the context of a co-op. But to simplify it, it's kind of like a condo. So, Ms. Hawkinson, do you remember what the number is? We did have a price target. I don't remember what it is off the top of my head. Yeah, so 10% of the units would be priced towards that price. And when will we actually get into it? We're hoping in the next 120 days. The next step from the senior side is for the developer to submit a letter of intent that actually spells out terms of the project. What the land price is, what the unit count is. That letter would also identify some of their assumptions. So, for example, we're presuming that it will include the 10% affordable units. If in the future the HRA decides we want 50% affordable, well then the terms of their purchase offer would change to reflect that. But that is an imminent step. I would expect to get something in the next 60 days, if not sooner, from United Properties.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions, comments? I'll just follow on with a few comments. I mean, I view this as strictly what it is an engagement letter to engage Brown Shoe and United Properties in this concept planning that we're doing with how we're going to generally use this property. The south half for senior co-op, the north half for uses yet to be determined. But as Commissioner Anderson says, a strong public element to it that has some activity involved. Personally, I like the time frame. I like the proposed schedule so we can keep moving forward. I do think there could be a little bit more tightness in step one around what the HRA costs are, but I think the language is broad enough for the purposes intended to cover what we want to cover, and then you'll work that out individually with folks. And understandable as to the north half of the property, I think Frauenschuh is taking on a different role than they might traditionally take on, not as a developer, but representing the city's interests in a way, and the broader interests of the site to try to make sure that we get the kind of uses that we want to see on there. And so I think those questions were well put and the comments well placed this morning. But I think for me, the purposes intended are captured in this engagement letter, which is I view as more general in nature. So having said that and having asked those questions, is there a motion to continue the redevelopment planning process and approve the engagement letter with Frauenschuh and United Properties?
So moved.
Is there a second? Is there a second?
I'll second that.
All right. We get a motion and second to continue the redevelopment planning process over at the old Public Works site at 5146 Eden Avenue and approve the engagement letter with Frauenschuh and United Properties as crafted by our staff and those two entities. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion as stated say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. And now, Manager Neuendorf, an update on 4917 Eden Avenue, which we know as the site kitty corner to City Hall, which is the old Perkins site, or the existing Perkins site, I should say.
Yes, exactly. So this conversation will actually have two parts. I'll run through a brief update on the project. The developers are in the audience with us today in case there's any questions. But at this point, in your packet, I've included a staff report, a very brief staff report, as well as a letter prepared by Ellers Associates. So staff, as well as Ellers and our legal counsel, have met with the developers on multiple occasions over the last month or the last 6 weeks to better understand their financials, to look at what their financial performer looks like, their construction costs, their operating costs, to really scrutinize that to better understand their financial situation. And what we have confirmed is there is a gap in their financing that but for the use of TIF, the project as it's been approved would not be able to move forward. So staff does feel very, we think that's a fair assessment to identify there is a gap. The project itself is big, right? It's an $83 million project. So that's a nice investment in Edina. That would create about 200 apartments. 10% of those are affordably priced. A lot of the other public benefits you've discussed through the zoning conversations. But the financial gap is caused primarily by three elements. The escalating construction prices these days, both for materials and labor, is wildly unpredictable. It's higher. We know it'll be higher than it was 2 years ago, but there's just some really odd swings in costs these days. The land cost is also high. It's an attractive site in a good location in Edina. And the third element that raises the cost is the fact that it's a redevelopment site. So again, in order to build anything new, you've got to tear down the old stuff. You've got to bring utilities to a property that's never really had stormwater type services, and I'm sure there's some asbestos and other stuff in that building, and so that all adds to the overall budget. So staff does certainly agree that there's a financial gap. We've also engaged Ellers to look at the project at a higher level, a more comprehensive level. So we've confirmed that if the project is built, there definitely will be enough new taxes to finance the gap to make that project viable. But we also estimate that there would be about $6.8 million extra that this project would generate that could be used for public improvements in the immediate vicinity. And through the zoning conversations, I think we're all clear that the transportation improvements are the critical element to see if this project turns from a good idea into actually something that gets built. So that's the second part of the conversation this morning. Engineering Director Chad Milner is with us this morning, and he's worked with consultant firms to put some concepts together we want to share with you. This morning we're not looking for any formal action, but we'd really love to hear your discussion. From a financing perspective, what I would love to hear is whether or not there's enough information that's of interest to you for us to keep going. The next step in the TIF process would be to prepare a term sheet, basically a couple-page document that lists those business terms. That would then come back to this group for approval, and then we would proceed to contract eventually. So if there's enough interest here, we'd love to, staff is ready to keep going, our consultants are ready to keep going. If you tell us to stop, we will stop. So that's one thing I would like to hear. But I think it really falls down to the transportation elements. We've got a great package here. There's lots of good options. We do know that TIF can pay for some of them, but not for all of them. Some of the improvements would be short-term, where they could be implemented over the next couple of years. Some of the improvements could be implemented over the next 3 decades. So there's a lot here, but at this point, I'll turn it over to Chad, and then we're happy to answer any other questions as we go through it, unless there's any questions at the moment for me.
So, Mr. Chair, I guess I want to talk about the TIF for the baseline project before we get into transportation, if we could, because that's adding additional. So you've listed the but for as the escalating construction costs, high cost of land, and the redevelopment costs. I'll say that's not stuff that I am comfortable spending TIF money on. However, we have asked them to take on some public benefits in this project that were very expensive, and that is setting aside the piece of land next to Highway 100 so for future transportation developments, and providing that affordable housing that I know drives the cost of the element. I'm really, and you know, the idea of public art and making, and some of the things that they've put in there that really is for public benefit. I am more comfortable talking about TIF in terms of tangible public benefits. When it comes down to the cost of redevelopment, I think that's the risk that the developer needs to take. And I'm uncomfortable as a public body putting public funds towards helping a private developer meet their costs. So I would ask, and I mean, we really have asked some pretty serious public benefits in this project, but I'm more comfortable allocating the TIF money towards that than I am towards the cost of redevelopment, because I think that's the risk that any developer needs to account for on their own dollar. And I think it's terrible that the construction costs have skyrocketed, but that's not a public benefit to cover that. That's a risk that a developer takes. So as we move forward with this, I really do want to see that TIF articulated in terms of public benefits, because I'm extremely uncomfortable saying, well, the cost of land was high, so we need to supplement it. The Perkins is a perfectly good restaurant. And we heard from the public pretty vociferously that they were concerned about bringing in a new development. I think overall it is a benefit to the public, but public financing should go for something that's tangibly public. And I hope that we can see that articulated in the future. So that was my question.
Yes, Commissioner, we definitely will have that. So when it comes to tax increment, the first step we do is identify that financial gap. In this case, it's about $5 million. And then we also confirm that there is enough public benefit to equate to that $5 million. If the public benefit is only $1 million, the staff recommendation would be $1 million. But at this early stage in the conversation, we think we can get to that $5 million in public benefit. There's the land value for the easement that they'll donate to us for a future highway improvement to benefit not their project, but to benefit the whole neighborhood, the whole northern half of Edina, essentially. That's a couple $1 million in land value just for that easement. It's a big easement. They've also volunteered and agreed to put an easement on their surface parking lot. So with Tupa Park, sometimes we hear concerns that when there's classes over there, you've got school buses, but parents want to join, and then there's a teacher, and there's not enough parking for some of the big school groups that go through there. They've offered to put a public easement on their surface lot, so we could use that for events like that or anything, quite frankly. Other public benefits are the public art and some of that streetscape enhancement that I think was one of the things I heard lots of compliments about. It's expensive to put public art in a public place to get the right art that fits and won't get damaged by salt and winter snow and everything. And then one of the other biggest public benefits is the stormwater. Right now, all the storm just simply runs into a pipe that goes into the creek, unfiltered. Just whatever salt or oil is in there just ends up in the creek. With this project, they would bring it into the 21st century, and they would filter that water and hold it on site and let it trickle in. And so that's a big improvement for the creek clarity, which benefits anyone that touches the water south of this site, from Sunny Slope down to Minnehaha Falls. So there's plenty of public benefit, but certainly in the TIF term sheet, we'll have a very concise table of what those benefits are by description and by cost. But we will use that as a benchmark for the TIF for any future TIF recommendation.
Terrific. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Jackson. Commissioner Anderson.
Thank you,
has a few
Mr. Chair.
Questions and comments as well.
I'm sorry?
Go ahead.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so just a couple of comments quickly as it relates to the TIF amount. Number one, lumber futures are down over 20% from their peak, and that'll ultimately work its way through the system. There's other costs associated in construction which are up and may remain up, especially labor. So I don't want to spend too much time on that. Although I do agree with Member Jackson that the cost of construction is a developer risk. And when we establish a budget for construction, it may go down, it may go up, and I'm certain that that's all covered in contingencies. The thing that I really want to bring forward is that when we first discussed this in a rezoning concept, there was a document that was forwarded, I think, to each member of the council at that time, entitled Edina Math, that minimized the impact of the site acquisition on the project itself. But we see here clearly that the site acquisition, site allocation per unit is about twice that of market. So we can see that it clearly affects what the project itself does. And then we are asking for public financing to bridge that gap partially. It's a very expensive parcel. So I just think that we want to take a good look at that as we consider public funding for that site. We can't control the cost of it. It's really up to the developer and the owner of the site to discuss that. There was also discussion at that time that there was some negotiation occurring there. I don't know if that occurred or what the outcome of that discussion was, but that would be something to explore a little bit. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for those comments.
I'd also comment and join my colleagues in saying that I like that we've identified the gap, and I look forward to hearing your analysis from a staff standpoint on whether you think there's sufficient public benefit to bridge the gap, if you will. Because I've got my own concerns about the cost of the land. When I look at the numbers that our public finance people put together, it seems to me that there's a land acquisition cost here that is, to me, out of touch with the market, frankly. And that's not our issue, and I think Commissioner Anderson pointed out well, it's between the developer and the owner of the property. But that's going to have a potential effect on how we analyze this thing, I think, because we've all recognized that from the very beginning, that what we understand the developer agreed to pay for this land is a very, very premium price. And I guess there's one argument that just reflects the market because you got a willing buyer and a willing seller, but on the other hand, we're not here to provide opportunity as a city for a landowner who gets to potentially sell his property at a price that's outsized to the market. And so I think that's another analysis that we should have you do, is what is the market, so that we understand that better.
We'll definitely come back with some comments.
All right. But in terms of keeping going, I like that. And I also like the idea that the gap identified would involve pledging only 65% of the TIF available. I mean, and over a 15-year period of time, and not a 26 or a 21-year period of time. I think that those are positive sort of elements in this. But that price of the land continues to be a lingering sort of difficulty for all of us, I think.
When we come back, we'll definitely address each of those concerns that you raised and get more detail for full consideration.
Thank you. And then on to Director Milner, who's going to talk. I can't believe you've gotten some good work done on this quickly, frankly. It's impressive.
So there is a final report coming. We just didn't have time to start the draft, their concepts. We looked at a bunch of options for all of these areas, but we're only going to show the ones that are kind of rising to the top. So just to remind the HRA, this was the condition put on the project from the council, requiring satisfactory plan for resolution of transportation system issues east of Highway 100 in the Grandview District by the city. So this was our condition. And the goals of the study we put forward was improve safety, traffic operations, access, and reduce that complexity of that existing roadway network. So first I want to touch on that term, the transportation issues. So there is no data-supported safety issues. We've had 17 minor kind of typical fender bender accidents in the district, but there is not anything that raises to a level of a real safety concern within the district. Traffic operations, again, with many of the studies we've seen with other projects in the district, are at acceptable levels. There's a few movements that are not, but again, they are acceptable. There are some delays, some normal delays and some inconvenience within the district. What we do see is gaps or barriers or that experience when you think about the lack of boulevards on our pedestrian and bicycle facilities. So that's really what's lacking within the district. So again, we're looking at some draft concepts. We want to verify direction. We did have many different layouts for these intersections, but these are the ones that are kind of rising to the top. And the first one I wanted to share that didn't rise to the top, but was an idea of the council, was kind of moving Grange Road. And we looked at the pros and cons, the strengths and weaknesses, and there really wasn't something that would justify. This one created more issues than it solved. So this one we did look at. We'll have a much better information on the pros and cons in the report. But just wanted to remind the council or the HRA that we did look at it, and it just didn't provide benefits. It really created more of an issue on the network when you look at these other options that are coming forward. So we'll start nearest to the project. Here's a concept for 2 mini roundabouts. It really cleans up that intersection. The green line there is a break in the project. We could do the west half independent of the east half. The east half along Eden is a nice to have, but doesn't need to happen. But that west section with the 2 smaller roundabouts really improves traffic operations from now and 20 years in the future. It improves the bike and ped network. This graphic did shift the western roundabout a little further north to get it out of the developer's property, so you can see it's within the right-of-way. And then we own the properties to the north, which helps with this concept in developing it. And it opens up a little bit of space in this corner where the Wilson Road kind of comes up today. So there's a little bit of things we could do. What could we do in that area from a public benefit standpoint? We wanted to make sure that the consultant was aware of the framework and the guiding principles of the district. So we said, let's also look at the pedestrian bridge over Highway 100 idea, and let's see how these improvements could tie into that. So on again, that green line is a break point where we don't intend to do the ped bridge right now. There's a lot of property issues that would have to be figured out. But Grange Road there on the right, you can see improvements to the transportation network, narrowing travel lanes, and then putting in a shared use path. So there is a connection finally from Eden up to 50th Street for bikes and peds along that west side. So a wide shared use trail. And then also a connection into the City Hall parking lot there. We can come through the berm there and make that connection where we currently have kind of a pedestrian spine down the center of the parking lot. Moving up to 50th Street, we heard a lot of comments from the neighborhood up there that it's not safe to exit their neighborhood. They had concerns with traffic volumes and speeds. So we looked at some concepts here, and this one really satisfied a lot of those concerns that they had. This would reduce conflict points and also access directions. So it would make it a right in, right out of the neighborhood and of City Hall. So it reduces those conflicts of having to cross 4 or 5 lanes of traffic to take that left-hand turn. It also creates protected left-hand turns. So if you do get in those median areas, you're protected from other traffic, which they say today is an issue. It does create a little bit of a longer route for those residents, but in the end, the time they wait to cross during peak times now is about the same as what it would take for them to take a right. You'd have a left turn lane at the signal at Grange. They would do a U-turn, and that'd be a protected movement with a traffic signal, and then they could head east towards Wooddale. Again, the green line is a spot where we could build just the west half of the project. The east half is, again, a nice concept that's nice to have, but doesn't have to happen right now. And it also improves the bike and ped facilities with wide sidewalk shared use paths on both the north and the south side. The one issue with this is the right-of-way impacts. This is kind of a worst-case scenario for impacts to those 2 private properties to the north. We could narrow lanes, narrow some of the other stuff, and hopefully reduce those impacts, but we don't know exactly what those right-of-way impacts would be. So we would potentially be asking for some easements to put those facilities in. This would reduce the conflict points and provide some traffic calming, because now we have medians in the center and narrow those travel lanes. So it wouldn't impact volumes, but it would potentially slow down the traffic. And then the other one that was very interesting in the study is an idea on the bridge that crosses over 100. So again, we provided the framework of all of the studies and the frontage road ideas that have been previously discussed, and we didn't want to start over, but we wanted to continue those ideas. And what we learned is there is a simple way to start to improve the ped and bike access across that bridge, start to open up some of that potential land that MnDOT currently owns in those redundant ramps, and do that in a fashion that's fairly simple using the existing bridge. So every concept we've ever seen, we had to build a whole new bridge. This bridge is not due for replacement anytime soon. But this layout here is called a divergent diamond interchange. So if you're familiar with 34th near the airport in Bloomington, that's one of the things. There's another one at 169 and 41, and another one at 35W and County Road 96. When you travel in either direction, as you enter it will be signalized intersections on each side of Highway 100, and then you would cross over to the south side of the bridge if you wanted to head southbound, if you're heading westbound. And then it's basically a free left onto the ramps to get onto the highway. This would create a big wide facility for bikes and peds down the center of the bridge and be protected by medians. And then there's the off-ramp. So this is a very simple concept for an off-ramp. It wouldn't take a bridge. It would just be built on the surface, and it would begin to open up this space and reduce these redundant ramps. So it's a very simple way to get to a lot of those goals that we've discussed previously, and without replacing that full bridge. So the initial estimates, this is for street costs only. We didn't look at any utilities. We do have some utility needs, but this goes back to the TIF financing discussion that Bill had touched on sooner. So the ones underlined are kind of the ones that we feel are the ones that should be really considered, working with Ellers to determine which ones fall within the district and which ones are eligible yet. That'll be coming. But when we look at the 3 underlined ones, that's the 50th Street, Grange to east of Dale, that's that west half. And there's some ranges there, 1.4 to 2.2 million. The Eden Avenue with the 2 roundabouts, that's 1.1 to 1.6 million, just the roundabout area there. And then the Grange Road pedestrian improvements, 245,000 to 370,000. So when we look at those 3 underlined items, that's 2.8 million to 4.2 million. That includes engineering in there and some contingencies. Those are the items, Bill mentioned there's up to 6.8 or so million available. Those are some of the things that may be available once we continue that review with Ellers. And then there's other costs in there that we're looking at. I think the one to note is that DDI interchange is estimated at $5 to $7 million, so it puts it in more of a kind of a realistic pricing versus a brand-new bridge pricing if we wanted to move forward with those things that we've talked about in the framework and the vision of the district. So I guess, like I mentioned, the final report will be coming when we get through this, but today we just wanted to see if we were on the right track and answer some questions on these concepts.
Just a clarification, looking at your chart in the written material, there's actually a funding source column, and it talks about the use of the potential TIF at 4917, and maybe Manager Neuendorf wants to comment on this as well. What I see on your on the written presentation is that Wilson, Eden, Grange intersection, Grange Road, and the 50th Street, Grange to Dale improvements could all be captured by any TIFs that we might approve for 4917. Is that your understanding?
That was what we've had those initial discussions yet. I think we're still
Yes, that's exactly correct. So we've met with our colleagues at Ehlers and also with our legal advisors at Dorsey, just to make sure that if we do use tax increment for these public infrastructure improvements, that it's a legitimate use of TIF. Public infrastructure is one of the primary reasons that TIF was created in the first place, the whole concept. But we have to be careful. For example, we could not use TIF from this project to fix traffic problems 3 miles away on 50th Street. Right? It's got to be proximate to the project. So as we look through some of these concepts, we feel that the 3 items that are shaded here pass that test of being an appropriate use of tax increment. So the intersection where the roundabout could happen, finally building a sidewalk on Grange, all leads to the project. There is a bus stop on 50th Street right by City Hall. Without a clear way to get there, I mean, you can like shortcut across the street and through a parking lot and you end up at the bus stop, but wow, what if we had a sidewalk where you could actually just walk to the bus stop? So we can fund those types of things, including the portion of 50th. We do want to be cautious, though, about using TIF to make improvements to 50th too far east of City Hall. That's where it gets into too much of a gray area, and we'd recommend that we don't go there. We just stick to the areas where it's clearly an eligible use of TIF. But we feel confident in this recommendation.
All right. So with this recommendation, what I understand then is that there would, because we were at proposed 65% of TIF capacity with respect to the building itself, there's capacity here to be able to do this, these transportation improvements, in addition to public benefit we might determine to be appropriate relative to the building at 4917. Is that correct?
That's definitely correct. Yeah, we would, once a project is finished, well, once a project gets started, that's when we that's when we actually get moving on the public improvements. Just in case something happened with the project and it stalled, we wouldn't want to be on the hook for public improvements with no funding source. So there'll be a slight lag, but once the private project gets rolling, then we would start going full steam with the public improvements. And we could finance them using part of the TIF on day one, once the project is finished. And then once any developer note is paid off, then we would use the remaining balance of the TIF dollars that are coming in to pay the full cost of the road improvement projects. So we've got it's a complex funding arrangement, but it's certainly plausible, and the numbers add up and it makes sense.
All right. Thank you. Commissioner Anderson, did you have a comment or question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We concern ourselves with but for quite often here, and I guess my question is, what if? If we don't wind up with an approved project here, is it possible to create a TIF district that can also create these road improvements? Our infrastructure requires it. I mean, regardless of what happens there or further south or at the Grandview district. How would we go about that? Maybe haven't thought through that all the way. Maybe that's not fair in this moment, but this study triggers that for me, because I think that the work done here is really, really well done. and it's well thought out, and we have some solutions here that could be done at any time.
I've not thought a lot about that option, but in order for a TIF district to work, you have to have new investment that grows the tax base. So if this private project on the Perkins site were not to happen, there'd be no growth to the tax base, and then no incremental taxes that are generated. So we typically would not create a TIF district unless there's a project that we know is very likely to happen. I think over the years, the way that the TIF laws are structured, you really want to have a private project that is ready to go, and then you know that you've got a funding source. 20, 30 years ago, cities used to be much more speculative in the use of TIF. Create a big, broad district, hope that something, identify a bunch of needs, public needs, hope that something happens, and cross your fingers and see how it plays out. That worked fairly well 20 to 30 years ago. These days, you really want a project that you know is going to happen. Otherwise, it's just a waste of everybody's time and money.
Okay. A question for Director Milner. In considering these improvements, we had a lot of testimony about traffic going east on 50th, and it's clear here from this discussion that we don't want to consider that too much this morning. I can see the green line. However, the Sunny Slope area is as impacted here as any other, and I wonder and I can see that some of this would ease their burden, if you will. At the same time, I don't think it really gets to the whole of their problem, and frankly, I don't know that given the nature of Vernon and 50th, that will ever totally solve it. However, do you have any recommendations, or has there been any thought given to that particular area? Because that's certainly a hot point.
Well, this was addressing their needs other than traffic volumes.
Yes.
It's going to be what it is because we don't have a lot of east-west connections. So
Yep.
if we can't reduce volumes, what can we do from a speed standpoint? Building infrastructure, narrowing lanes typically slows speed. We have the same volume, but it slows the speed. And then we heard a lot about the bike ped network. How can we fill these gaps and make it safer for people to walk and bike within the district? This does the same thing. And then it also reduces those conflicts. They talked about the left turns. They're scared
Yes.
to sit out in traffic. This is a protected left. It gives them the space to safely sit there. The only thing that's probably not going to be liked is creating that where you can't take a left turn anymore out of your neighborhood. But when you look at the timing, it's the same as what they're dealing with today from a timing standpoint. It just gets rid of those conflicts and potential accidents.
Okay. That's helpful. Thank you for the definition. Can I ask a question, Mr. Chair?
Certainly.
I would like to, while Director Milner is with us this morning, make certain that we flip back to 4040 West 70th. There was a West Promenade proposal in there as well that we kind of skipped over, and I'd like to know more about that as it relates to that project and the improvements that are anticipated there.
Can we please stay with this before we?
Yes,
of course.
I'm asking
We can go to
a
that
procedural question.
before we adjourn.
Yes.
We'll go back to Director Milner's memo of July
Thank you.
21st on the West Promenade. Okay, go ahead. Commissioner Jackson. Was that all you had, Commissioner?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Director Milner, I guess when I first looked at this, I was a little concerned that these two roundabouts would preclude the idea of the changed on-ramp. I guess that doesn't, but as we go forward, I have to say I was looking at the big circular off-ramp and on-ramp and the two roundabouts. I got a little dizzy just thinking about all the ways. You think about Highway 7 improvements in St. Louis Park. There are like 3 roundabouts in a row. And as we move forward with this, I'd like to see, just kind of an overall concept drawing, and then so that I could draw with my finger, and forgive me, it's just the way I've got to go through this, what the experience would be like moving through that area. I guess when I saw those 2 roundabouts, I was a little spooked just because it seems like, and I guess if you're going through, it's not a big deal, but I want to make sure that as people come and go from Highway 100, they're not getting lost. in going around and around. And that this, I guess my question for you is these two roundabouts would not preclude the off-ramp. I think from your presentation, I've got that. So to clarify that, and then just kind of how the public can read this in terms of their experience driving through this area and walking.
Yep. We'll make sure, like I said, we're just getting the staff report done and the overall report, and we'll make sure we put all the pieces together, because we're hearing these three options are pretty good. And then your question about the ramps, the DDI could be done very soon. In long term, there might be still going back to the frontage road ideas on both sides and doing all that could be done long term yet. But the DDI was one thing that just get us to a place in our vision much sooner, which was an interesting idea. So we'll get that concept for you.
Okay, thank you. And I do want to thank you and your team and the consultants for turning this around so quickly. It's really helpful to allay some of the concerns of the public, and exciting to see the opportunities that are here to make it a safer experience for everybody involved. So thank you.
We've got a question for Director Milner, for Manager Neuendorf. Across from Perkins to the north, we've got those historic buildings, and I'm wondering if some of these improvements, as a result of some of these improvements, if we decided we wanted to move those buildings, whether it would be down to the Mill Pond area, Wooddale Park, or it would be to Anderson Acres or some other appropriately determined location, can that be part of a TIF project where we would move those historic buildings?
It definitely could be. Those buildings would qualify to be included in a TIF district if we chose to do that. And TIF dollars could be used to move those, to clear the site. In this case, clearing the site doesn't mean demolishing the buildings. It would be moving them somewhere else. So that's all an eligible expense. One of the conditions, though, there's always some strings. If we move the site, if we move those buildings, we would have to do so with the intention to put that property into private hands. Otherwise, one of the fundamentals of TIF is that you can't use TIF just to build a new city facility. So we'd want to be careful not to give any impression like that. But if we wanted to move those buildings to a more appropriate location where they can be a little bit more useful and enjoyed better, we certainly could redevelop that parcel. That would not have to happen immediately, but it would have to be that intention to put it into some kind of private use, housing, commercial, or whatever might be appropriate. But definitely an option.
But not a public use, not a fire station.
Not a fire station. We looked into that extensively.
If we use tax increment to do it, if we used other sources of revenue to do it, then it could be a fire station site.
Okay.
Yeah, good point.
All right, thank you. Anything else on that topic? All right, thanks for those updates. I think you've got sufficient direction, both of you, or guidance on that. And our colleagues may be providing some information to you too, directly. They weren't able to be with us today. And then, Director Milner, if you can go back to your memo on July 21, where you talked about the proposed West Promenade alignment, and then we talked a little bit about the section from 70th over to 69th on Valley View. You had some interesting information there as well.
Yeah, thank you, Chair and Commissioners. Again, this was related to the project you talked about earlier this morning, and the condition for staff just to take a look at what can we do to continue the West Promenade idea. So in the packet was a memo that myself and Andrew Scipione put together, a transportation planner of some ideas that are in the comp plan, in the guiding principles of the Southdale District, and the bike ped master plan. And we felt like you could merge those ideas and continue the West Promenade idea along Value Road in this area. It actually makes quite a bit of sense. So we provided that information, shared those graphics, and this was kind of the concept that we came up with was, and it's based on what the developer was looking at for that project. So if you start on the right-hand side of the graphic, they proposed an 8-foot wide sidewalk with a 6-foot boulevard. So we were just going to start from that point and move west towards the neighborhood. So right now, we got wide travel lanes, it's just a lot of space that we don't need. So can we narrow those lanes? Again, that slows traffic. So if we follow state aid standards, we could have 2 12-foot lanes. And then the conversation with the neighborhood on the west side, making a big wide sidewalk or shared use path, and we got room for 12 feet over there. I think that'd be a nice facility. And then leaving space, a 6-foot buffer. Let's plant some trees and landscaping, or put they already have some fences. Do we put another fence? That'll be a discussion, but it really goes to a lot of the comments that the neighborhood had on the project. The concern I had was, how do we fund this? So when we looked in our CIP, Centennial Lakes TIF was going to be used in 2024 for a Promenade Phase 5. It was just a placeholder. We didn't know where Phase 5 was, what it was, but there was $600,000 allocated in that year. That's roughly the cost of this. So we could reallocate those funds if the council or the HRA so chooses and do this project. And the project would just be from 69th to 70th. We already have some nice facilities on 70th that would make that connection. And we have some plans for Valley View Road heading up towards Highway 62 in the future of doing a road diet and increasing the facilities there for bikes and peds. So this could tie into that in the future. So this doesn't feel like it's just sticking out alone with nothing else, because there's current sidewalks on Valley View, and it really ties in nicely with 70th Street. So I think it's feasible, it's possible, and there's potential money there from Centennial Lakes TIF to do it. As we discussed earlier, you can't use the housing TIF money that you're discussing and creating that district. So I don't know if there's anything else you'd like to have discussed on this option.
I think, again, good work in a short period of time. I think this is really quite encouraging with respect to that short block in there and what we could possibly do to use it as kind of the jump-off point for the rest of the West Promenade. And it's a beautiful way to start, I think, potentially. And I think we do need to think about fencing too on the west side, and probably higher than what we would normally allow at 6 feet. But nonetheless, I think this is a great start to a discussion. And it's nice to know we got a potential source of funding to cover most, if not all, of the project. Commissioner Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Director Milner, thank you for the quick work on this. Again, you guys have been busy. 2 questions. One is, can you go through again in a little bit more detail what the $600,000 is currently allocated towards?
Yeah, the CIP, it says Promenade Phase 5. But it doesn't really define where that is. We've had some discussions that, how do you get past the Galleria property, right? Because it kind of stops there. Do we want to extend it west or east and kind of get some easements and go through the property and get up to 66? So it really wasn't a defined path or defined project. It was a budget that we have put in there for consideration, and it's still 3 years out.
Terrific. That's really useful. We had a tree summit this week, and one of the questions was soil volume for urban trees. I'm looking at this 2-foot slice on the slide that you've got up. Can you talk about, I guess because it's not, it's a circle under a sidewalk, but can you talk about whether that's sufficient for a healthy urban forest?
I would say that's just a missed thing in the graphic. It was the tool I was using to make the graphic. So I would really start at the sidewalk, because anything that way is the developer, and they already have a landscaping plan and sufficient space for trees. So generally, I would say 2 feet isn't enough. The only thing we've done in 2 feet is daylilies, that kind of thing along roadways.
Okay, so I guess, I just want to make sure that this is something where the trees will be healthy and grow, because that's very useful. Thank you so much.
Commissioner Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, thank you for a very quick turnaround and a quite excellent solution to what we've heard from the Cornelia neighborhood especially. One question I have about Figure 3, the graphic, a bike path along there. I don't really see it pictured, but I'm certain you've considered it.
It would be the mixed-use sidewalk, but we did do some layouts
On the
with
12th.
on-street bike lanes, but then you're starting to lose space, and there's more
Yes.
people in the street. And I continue to think that we should just get people off the street. If you're comfortable riding in traffic, this will be a low speed, you're just going to ride in traffic. But we want to design our facilities for the majority of the people that aren't comfortable riding in the street. And so it would be mixed use. So we didn't put a little graphic of a biker there on that 12-foot wide sidewalk, shared use path.
Okay, great, thank you. And just a quick follow-up comment is that this was such a passionate discussion during the rezoning hearing and approval on it that I again thank Director Milner and his team, but also just would be very supportive of this proposal along that space. And I know that the Cornelia neighborhood, many of the residents there often feel that because of their proximity to Southdale, that so much of the tumult, if you will, that goes on around construction, reconstruction, development, kind of affects them more, say, than west of 100. And this is a great step to try to resolve some of those concerns, and is a clear benefit to them as well as the city overall.
Yeah, and I think the interesting piece here is it's not tied to TIF dollars. We already have the money, and it could happen whether or not the project goes forward, right, versus what we just talked about here.
Yeah, good comments. Yeah, thanks, Commissioner. Also for Commissioner Jackson, I think this whole conversation on the West Promenade started when we were looking at one of the projects, I think the most recent project proposed that isn't going forward at 7,200, 7,250. And I think it was Councilmember Staunton, Commissioner Staunton, that raised the issue of, well, gee, was there some way we could start thinking about a promenade on the west side like we have on the east side, and could we get beyond 7,200, 7,250, weave our way past Cedars of Edina and start to connect into 70th and the bike system there, and then go south to 77th and connect into the on-surface bikeway system there as well. So that's where that was the genesis of it, and that has continued on. So thanks for parking that money, everybody, staff. Yeah, here we are. All right, anything else, folks? Any comments from anybody? From our Executive Director or HRA Commissioner comments? We're a little bit over time, but thanks for your patience. And is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
We've got a motion and a second to adjourn. Discussion? All those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. We stand adjourned.